Hello, in today's lesson we're going to be recapping section 7.1 through 7.3. In these sections we've talked a lot about angle relationships, we've talked about adjacent angles, vertical angles, complementary angles, supplementary angles, etc. So first thing we're going to do is recall what it means for angles to be complementary, supplementary, vertical, or adjacent. Complementary angles are two angles whose sum is 90 degrees. Supplementary angles are two angles whose sum is 180 degrees, or a straight line. Now, vertical angles are two angles, if we have an X or two lines that intersect, vertical angles are angles on opposite sides of that intersection. So, for example, if these were two lines, the vertical angles might be the top and the bottom. You may also have the angles on the left and the right as well. Those would also be vertical since they're across from one another. Adjacent angles are simply angles that are touching or sharing a side. So if I have this first angle, an angle that's adjacent would share one of the sides of that other angle. So an adjacent angle might look something like this. So I have this first angle and this second angle, and they are adjacent because they both make use of that edge in between. So number one, I'm looking at angle B, and I'm looking at angle A, and I see a few things. First thing I see is that they are touching. They share this side in between them. The second thing is that together they form a straight line. So I see this straight line here formed by both of those angles together. So therefore these angles are adjacent, but they are also supplementary. They're supplementary because they form a straight line. In number two, I'm looking at angles A and B, and I see that they're on opposite sides of one another. They're not adjacent. They don't share a side. If I go through and ignore this extra line that's in between them, the relationship might be a little bit easier to see. When I do this, I do see that there's an intersection of two lines, and that A and B are on opposite sides of that intersection. That makes these two vertical angles. In example 3, I have two angles that are touching. They are adjacent to one another because they are sharing this side in between them. But also, if I look at angle A and angle B, these two angles here, and if I ignore these other two lines coming out to the left, I see that angle B and angle A together form a 90-degree angle, and I know that because of this right angle symbol shown in the corner of my figure. Since they make a 90-degree angle, these two angles are not only adjacent, but they are also complementary angles. Together, they form a 90-degree angle. Now in number 4, I have angle A and angle B. Again, they are touching. They both use this side in between. Neither of them are using these extra lines out to the side, so we can go ahead and ignore these. And looking at this picture, I do see that the angles are adjacent, but there's no other information telling us that these angles add up to 90 degrees or that they make a right angle of any sort. So these are just adjacent, and we can't say anything else after that. Now in these next few, we're going to go ahead and use our relationships to find the measure of angle B. So first is to determine the relationship, and second is to go through and find our variable, which in this case is B. Looking at number 5, I do see that the two angles are adjacent. They are touching. This line out to the right isn't doing anything for us. It has nothing to do with B or the 120, so we can ignore it. These two are adjacent, which means we can add them up, and it will equal the entire angle, which is 180 degrees because this angle is a straight line. So because these two form a straight line, I can take B, I can add 120, and it will equal 180 degrees. Subtracting 120 from both sides, I can solve for B and find that it is 60 degrees, or just 60. I'll do one more from this section, and then the rest will be on your own. Looking at number 6, I see that there is an x formed by these two lines that intersect, which means that this other line is not going to help us with our question. So we can go ahead and ignore that other line and focus just on this more simple diagram. Now, because these angles are on opposite sides of this intersection, they are vertical angles. Therefore, they are congruent or equal to one another. This means that B has to equal 30 degrees. I'll go ahead and leave the rest in this section up to you. In this next section, we're going to go ahead and find the value of x. This is a little bit different because instead of finding just B was already by itself, our diagrams are just slightly more complicated. But we go about them the same way. In number 9, I see the relationship between these two angles is that the angles are adjacent to one another. They are touching because they share that edge in between them. Since they both use this edge in between, they are adjacent angles. Now this means I can take the two smaller angles, that would be 2x and x minus 3, and I can add these together to equal the whole angle, which is a 90-degree angle. And we know it's a 90-degree angle based on the symbol in the corner of our diagram. Since we know it's a 90-degree angle, we simply add up these two smaller angles to equal that total 90-degree angle. But before I can start solving, I need to simplify. So I add my x's. 2x plus 1 more x is 3x. Minus 3 is equal to 90. From here, I need to isolate my x, so I start by adding 3 to both sides. So 3x is equal to 93. And now I just divide by 3 and divide by 3 to find that x is equal to 31. In number 10, our first job is to figure out the relationship between our two angles. I see 2x and 82 being the two angles that I'm given. These are across the intersection of two lines, which means they are vertical angles. Since they are vertical angles, they are congruent to one another, or they are equal to one another. Therefore, I can simply take the two angles, set them equal to each other. So 2x is equal to 82. And now I simply solve by dividing by 2 on both sides. My goal is to isolate x, and I find that x is equal to 41. There are just a few more problems left in this section. I'm going to go ahead and leave these ones up to you. Hopefully this is enough to get you started.